So the question we have here at the beginning of the third vision in the second half of the book, the ninth story in the book, second to the last story, is what do the circumstances of the beginning of the chapter, and which immediately precede Daniel's prayer, and the circumstances described at the end of the prayer, how do these circumstances relate to the prayer? Why not just start with the prayer and end with the prayer? So let's read them again, or at least starting in verse 2. It says, "In the first year of his reign," that is the reign of Darius, "I, Daniel, perceived in the books the number of years that according to the word of the Lord to Jeremiah the prophet must pass before the end of the desolations of Jerusalem, namely 70 years. So, Daniel is actually reading Jeremiah the prophet. And as he's reading Jeremiah, he reads about the 70 years. Now, this is a reference from Jeremiah chapter 25 and chapter 29. It's around the year 439, 38, when Daniel is reading the prophet Jeremiah, because we know that because it's the first year of Darius. Jeremiah wrote about the 70 years and his prophecy back around 604 BC. So if you do the math between 604 and 539, you get to around 65 or 66 years. Okay, that's the key number, is roughly, we'll just say roughly 65 years. Okay, why is that so important? Well, if you were reading Jeremiah the prophet, and he said that for 70 years the city of Jerusalem would lay desolate and be disciplined under the hand of God, but after the 70 years there would be a time of restoration. And Daniel is reading this 65 years after the prophecy was issued, then what do you think's on Daniel's mind? Well, of course, what's on his mind is that they're within just a short time of the 70 years being fulfilled. Now, were the 70 years literal? Is this literal? Or is it symbolic? Well, apparently Daniel thinks it's literal, because he's praying, and as you read his prayer, it's quite obvious that he's anticipating the potential restoration of Israel back to the land of Palestine and to the city of Jerusalem. And so he obviously understands the number of 70 years at least somewhat literally. But then at the same time, the number 70 is clearly symbolic, because 7 is the perfect number and it's 70 years. The idea of the discipline lasting for 70 years means it's a complete amount of time, so to speak. So the 70 years can be, right, both literal and symbolic. Why couldn't it be both? It doesn't have to be exactly literal. Maybe it's 68 years, maybe it's 69 years, maybe it's going to be 72 years. But it's symbolic, it's 70 years, but Daniel takes it as if it's basically going to be the time. So all that is to say, the circumstances of his reading Jeremiah and getting ready for the 70 years is what causes him to then bow his head and pray in anticipation of the potential restoration of Israel after 70 years. So clearly those circumstances are highly relevant. It also means, by the way, we really need to go back and read Jeremiah. I'd probably recommend you read Jeremiah 25 through 31 total to sort of get the full scope of the context and of the vision there of Jeremiah's prophecies. Now, there's something added to this after the prayer. It says that Daniel was praying at the time of the evening sacrifice. Well, why would you pray at the time of the evening sacrifice? Because when the evening sacrifice was offered, they added incense. And that incense represents the aroma ascending to God, represents Israel's prayers. Israel understood the incense going up before God as their prayers going up before God, their prayers and worship, of course, both ascending to God. So it's appropriate that it's at the time of the incense offering that Daniel was praying. And of course, the other really important part of the circumstance is that the man Gabriel, well, man is sort of tongue-in-cheek here, isn't it? Because Gabriel means man of God, strong man of God, and therefore but of course he's not a man, he's an angel. And as he comes to Daniel, he's going to bring God's answer to his prayer. Okay? Now, all of this should remind you of a story in the Gospel of Luke, because the opening story of Luke chapter 1, is the story of Zacharias, the daddy, the father of John the Baptizer. And what is Zechariah doing in chapter 1, the first story? Well, he's going into the temple to offer incense. And he is told, your prayer has been heard, as he goes and offers incense. The prayer, of course, was a prayer for a child that he and his wife Elizabeth had prayed decades before, but probably had long since stopped praying since they were older. And then, who is it that says this to Zacharias? But none other than Gabriel himself. And Gabriel, there in Luke chapter 1, is returning now. Just as he did with Daniel, he's returning. And guess what? There's probably going to be some connections between what Gabriel revealed to Daniel in chapter 9 and what Gabriel reveals to Zechariah in chapter 1 of Luke. All right, so that anyway is some of the circumstances. It should move us to want to read Jeremiah chapters 25 following, and then maybe some of Luke chapter 1 as well. So the question we're going to have next, the question we ask of all of these chapters, is what is being critiqued? What is being critiqued in chapter 9? And remember that as much as the chapters are parallel, what you would want to do is go back to chapter 4 and look at what was critiqued there, and then ask yourself how that compares to chapter 9. What are some of the similarities and differences in chapters 4 and 9, and what might be critiqued in chapter 9? And one very obvious hint is that chapter 9, in the prayer, Daniel himself is actually offering a critique, only not of Babylon, but of the city of Jerusalem. So whatever Daniel is critiquing is probably going to be the divine critique that is offered to us through the book of Daniel in chapter 9. All right, so best wishes with that, and we'll see you next time.